Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Cell. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindi newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindi newspaper dated 20th June 2020. And the article discussed in today's newspaper are displayed on your screen. Now, some of the articles that we are going to discuss in today's newspaper have already been discussed in the previous DNS videos, or they are ongoing issues. So accordingly, in this video, we have embedded some previous videos which will give you better insight into the ongoing issues. And also we have incorporated some of the prelims practice questions related to the issues that are present in today's newspaper, and they will give you a good insight into how to use the prelims practice for the upcoming preliminary examination. So let us start our discussion. Now, this article on page number 6 is related to the issue of defections that are happening in the Legislative Assembly of Manipur. And defections simply mean that MLAs and MPs switch from one political party to another. And to control this issue of defections, we note that India has enacted this anti-defection law. Now, even after the anti-defection law, the MLAs and MPs sometimes use the loopholes in the anti-defection law. And at the same time, the functioning of the speaker, who has been given the power to decide on the disqualification of the MLAs, has also come into question. So in this regard, the issue of defection has been challenged in the Supreme Court time and again. And in this regard, some of the observations of the Supreme Court are important regarding the anti-defection law. So accordingly, in the Daily News Simplified of 23rd January 2020, a decision or the order of Supreme Court was discussed in detail. And in that video, some important issues or provisions of the anti-defection law were also discussed. So what we'll do in this video is that we will revise from that Daily News Simplified certain aspects of the anti-defection law and also the issue or the order which was given out by the Supreme Court of India. And this can be a very important aspect for us from the General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic Constitution and Polity. So if you look at the UPSC previous year questions, you will find that a question related to anti-defection has been asked in the mains examination of 2013 and 14. And again, a question was asked in the preliminary examination of 2014 related to this anti-defection law. So if you look at this question, it was a very simple question that which one of the following schedules of the Constitution of India contains the provisions regarding the anti-defection law, and we note that the 10th schedule of the Constitution of India contains the provisions regarding the anti-defection law. Now the issue was that in the Manipur Assembly elections, out of the total 60 seats, the Congress party had won the 28 seats. However, the BJP had won only 21 seats. Now despite getting such low number of seats, BJP formed the government in Manipur Assembly. And it was able to do so because of support of other coalition parties and at the same time some MLAs switching from the Indian National Congress to the BJP. And this gave BJP the majority in the Manipur Assembly election. Now this switching of an MLA from the Congress party to the BJP and supporting the BJP even when he or she has won the elections on the ticket of the Congress party is a case of defection. And accordingly, it is the duty of the Speaker of the Manipur Assembly to decide on the question of disqualification of that MLA which has been changing or switching his sides. So accordingly, the Speaker of the Manipur Assembly was not deciding on the question of disqualification of the MLA because he had defected from the Congress party to the BJP. And accordingly, a petition was filed in the High Court of the Manipur. And this petition asked the High Court to direct the Speaker to decide on the disqualification of the defected MLA. However, the Speaker of the Manipur Assembly was sitting on this request and was not deciding on the disqualification of the MLA. However, the Manipur High Court refused to issue any directions to the Speaker, and accordingly, they referred this case to the Supreme Court because already certain issues related to anti-defection law are pending in the Supreme Court. And in that Supreme Court judgment, the Supreme Court had said that the High Court and Supreme Court can issue the directions to the Speaker. So in short, it nullified the observations of the Manipur High Court that it cannot issue directions to the Speaker. So this Supreme Court judgment decided that the Supreme Court and the High Courts can issue the directions to the speakers of. However, the issue here in this Manipur Assembly was that the Speaker was not deciding on the issue of disqualification and was stretching it beyond limit. And accordingly, the Supreme Court had set a time limit of 3 months to the Manipur Assembly Speaker to decide on the issue of disqualification. So, in short, the Supreme Court provided that any issue of disqualification should be decided by the Speaker within a period of 3 months. And also the Supreme Court in that judgment said that Constitution should be amended to provide for a permanent tribunal which is headed by the retired judges to decide on the issue of anti-defection. So these were few observations of the Supreme Court regarding the defection issue in the Manipur Assembly and regarding the functioning of the Speaker under the anti-defection law. So in short, it had set a time limit of 3 months for the Assembly Speaker to decide. Secondly, it had clarified that the Supreme Court and High Court can issue directions to the Speaker regarding the anti-defection law. And also the Supreme Court observed that the Constitution needs to be amended to form a permanent tribunal to decide on the issue of anti-defections. Now, regarding the important provisions of the anti-defection law, you should note that it was enacted for the disqualification of the members of the parliament and the state legislatures on the ground of defection from one political party to another. So as we have seen that there are instances when the MLAs and the MPs have been defecting from one political party to another. And especially we have seen that MLAs have defected in the Assembly of Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh and in the state of Manipur. So accordingly, a constitutional amendment was brought in and it was known as the 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Further, another important provision of the anti-defection law is regarding the authority who decides on the disqualification of the members on the grounds of defection. And accordingly, the anti-defection law has provided that the deciding authority regarding the disqualification of the members of parliament and the state legislatures on the ground of defection is the Speaker or the presiding officer of that house. Further, this act provides as to when a member can be disqualified. So a member of Legislative Assembly or member of Parliament can be disqualified on the ground of voluntarily giving up the membership of his or her political party. Further, a member can be disqualified if he or she votes or abstains from voting contrary to the directions which have been issued by the political party without obtaining prior permission. Thirdly, if an independent candidate joins any political party. And further, if a nominated member joins the political party after a period of 6 months. So these are the conditions when a member of Legislative Assembly or the Parliament can be disqualified on the grounds of defections. Now there are certain exceptions that have been provided against the anti-defection law. So in case there is merger of at least 2/3 of the members of a political party with another political party, this will not be considered as an issue of defection, and hence the MLAs or the MPs cannot be disqualified on the ground of defections if there is a merger of at least 2/3 of the members of a political party with another political party. And another exception that has been provided is that the Speaker of the House is allowed to give up the membership of the political party. So these are two exceptions, and these are the grounds on which a member of the Legislative Assembly or Parliament can be disqualified. And another important point is the deciding authority, and we note that it is the presiding officer of the respective houses. Now, despite an elaborate anti-defection law, there have been instances that the members of the Parliament and the Legislative Assemblies have been exploiting the loopholes of this law for switching from one political party to pursue their narrow interests. And accordingly, there have been certain interpretations of the Supreme Court on this anti-defection law. So first issue that came up in front of the Supreme Court was regarding the voluntarily giving up of the membership, which is one of the grounds for disqualification of members of parliament and the state legislatures on the ground of defection. So regarding the voluntarily giving up of the membership, it is known that the voluntary resignation from the political party amounts to defection, and hence a person can be disqualified on this ground. However, the Supreme Court has observed that the conduct of a member can also be considered as voluntarily giving up of the membership. So accordingly, if a member criticizes his or her own party and also provides a public support for the opposition parties, then it is considered that that member has voluntarily given up his membership of that political party, and hence this can be used as a ground for disqualification of that member of the House. Further, in the Kohito Holohan case of 1993, the Supreme Court had decided that the decisions of the Supreme Court under the anti-defection law are subject to judicial review. That is, they are not exempt from the judicial review. Further, in this recent Supreme Court judgment, it has set a time limit for the Speaker to decide on the issue of disqualification of the members of the Houses. And this time limit that has been provided by the Supreme Court is of 3 months. And further, the Supreme Court had clarified that the Supreme Court and High Court can issue the directions to the speakers for their functions under the anti-defection law. So these are few interpretations of the Supreme Court regarding the anti-defection law, and also we have seen certain important provisions of the anti-defection law. Further, another important issue that came up in the Assembly of Karnataka was the resignation of the MLAs from the ruling party, and accordingly the Speaker had disqualified those MLAs. However, one condition that was imposed by the Speaker of Karnataka Assembly was that the members who have been disqualified cannot fight the elections for next 6 years. However, this decision of the Speaker of Karnataka Assembly was annulled by the Supreme Court of India, and it had said that the members who have been disqualified on the grounds of anti-defection law can again fight elections for the remaining term of the assembly. So again, that judgment also becomes very important related to the anti-defection law. So these are few issues, and with this, let's take up the next article now. Now, this article on page number 10 reads that the gains from the coal mine auction are uncertain. Now, the issue of coal mine auction came into news because the Prime Minister of India had said that the coal would be brought out after decades of lockdown, and the private sector involvement would help realize rupees 33,000 crore of capital investment in the next 5 years. And accordingly, certain experts have said that despite the optimism that has been shown by the Prime Minister of India, the gains from the coal mine auction are uncertain because of various issues that are being faced in the coal mining sector. However, this statement of the Prime Minister of India came in the background of certain reforms that were announced by the Government of India in the coal mining sector. So in this article, we will try and understand the present status of coal sector in India, and also what were the issues that were being faced by the coal mining sector that the Government of India had to announce these reforms, and why were these issues there in the coal mining sector. So let us look at some of the issues related to coal mining sector and what are the new initiatives that were announced by the Government of India. Now, regarding the status of coal sector, you should note that India has the world's third largest coal reserves, and also India is the third largest coal producer in the world. However, due to the growing needs of the rapidly expanding economy, the annual demand for coal has increased considerably. And accordingly, due to this increased demand, the shortage of coal in India is met through imports. So, in spite of having the world's third largest coal reserves, India imports about 25% of its domestic coal needs. Further, the shortage of coal forces the thermal power plants to operate below their threshold capacity. And as their profit margins have been reducing considerably because of operations below their threshold capacity, it has reduced their ability to repay back the loans to the banking sector. And as the coal sector has not been able to repay the loans to the banking sector, it has led to the increase in non-performing assets of Indian banks. So you can see that there is so much correlation between the demand of the energy in India, again the demand of coal-based energy, and also how is this demand being met? That is, it is being met through the imports of coal. Further, due to the shortage of coal, we note that the thermal power plants are operating below their threshold capacity, and this has considerably reduced their profitability. And due to reduced profitability, they have not been able to repay the loans, and which has led to the increase in non-performing assets. So all these issues are interlinked. Now, why is the coal sector facing these problems? Or what was the problem in the coal mining sector that it was not able to supply the required coal to the power plants? Now, the problem of the coal sector was attributed to the monopoly which was enjoyed by the Coal India Limited for the coal mining in India. And you might be knowing that the coal mining was nationalized in the year 1973, and accordingly there was monopoly of the Coal India Limited in the coal mining in India. Further, another issue was that of captive coal mine operations with end use restrictions. And in this sector, the government used to allocate the coal blocks to the private sector entities, for example, the power plants, steel plants, etc. However, the restriction that was imposed on these private players was that They could use the extracted coal only for their purposes and they were not allowed to sell the coal in the open market. So, this means that the market principles were not followed in the coal mining sector even when the private players had entered the coal mining. So, because of the issue of monopoly of the Coal India Limited and the allocation of captive coal mines with end use restriction, it had led to the inefficiencies in the coal extraction, and this had led to coal shortages supply to the thermal power plants. So, all these issues, as you can see, were interconnected, and accordingly, some reforms were required in the coal mining sector. So, the government of India has from time to time announced certain reforms in the coal mining sector, and let us look at these reforms. Now, firstly, the reforms were announced in February 2018, and in this, the government of India allowed the Indian private sector entities to mine and sell the coal in the domestic market. So, this virtually led to the end of monopoly which was enjoyed by the Coal India Limited for extraction and selling of the coal in market. So, basically, it allowed for entry of private sector in the coal mining. Again, in October 2018, the Government of India eased the end use restrictions on the captive coal mining, and it had initially allowed them to sell 25% of the extracted coal in the open market. So, the end use restriction was relaxed for the captive coal miners, and they could now sell 25% of the extracted coal in the open market. Further, in the August of 2019, 100% FDI was allowed in coal mining sector, and this enabled the foreign companies to extract and sell the coal in Indian market. Again, initially, as we note that 25% of the extracted coal could be sold in the open market by the captive coal miners. This was further relaxed, and the restrictions of end use restrictions were further lifted. So earlier, as we note that the captive coal mine operators were allowed to sell 25% of the extracted coal in the open market. So in this line, the government of India had allowed these captive coal miners to sell their entire coal in the open market. So thus this concept of captive coal mining came to an end with this decision of the government of India. So as you can see that some of the issues in the coal mining sector and some of the factors that led to the inefficiencies in the functioning of the coal sector have been tried to be removed by these reforms that have been announced by the government of India. And some of these changes were announced by amending the Mines and Minerals Act of 1957 or the MMDR Act and the Coals Mines Act of 2015. So accordingly, you can see that there were certain issues in the functioning of the coal mining sector that had led to reduced supplies to the thermal power plants and which was adversely impacting the non-performing assets of the banking sector. And they were basically because of the monopoly of the Coal India Limited and also because of the restrictions on the captive coal miners. So accordingly, in the various reform measures in the coal sector, the government of India had relaxed the captive coal mining limits, and also the government of India has done away with the monopoly of the Coal India Limited. And at the same time, it has allowed 100% foreign direct investment in the coal mining sector. Now, in the prelims practice of the August month, we have discussed a question related to the coal sector and the current affairs related to the coal sector. So, in this regard, let us revise from that video of the prelims practice the question that was related to the coal sector. And that will give you an understanding as to how UPSC has been asking questions related to coal sector in the previous year preliminary examination. And what can you expect in the upcoming preliminary examination. Now, this 10th question has been created based on the coal sector in India, and it is related to the recent changes done by the government of India related to this coal sector. Now, if you look at the questions that have been asked in the preliminary examination in the previous years, you will find that various questions have been asked related to this coal sector. For example, this question was asked in the year 2019. And if you look at these questions that were asked in the previous years, you will find that there was a question in the year 2018. Again, there was a question in the year 2015 and there was a question in the year 2012. Now, this question that was asked in 2018 had a statement related to, in India, state governments do not have the power to auction non-coal mines. Again, if you look at this question that was asked in 2012, so it was related to the import of coal in India. So it reads, despite having large reserves of coal, why does India import millions of tons of coal? If you look at this question that was asked in 2015, it reads, in India, the steel industry requires the import of, and it was related to coking coal. So the questions in the previous years have been related to the import of coal in India and also related to various government decisions related to the coal sector. And if you look at this question that was asked in 2019, it reads that coal sector was nationalized by the government of India under Indira Gandhi. Second is that now coal blocks are allotted or allocated on a lottery basis. And third is that till recently, India imported coal to meet the shortages of domestic supply, but now India is self-sufficient in coal production. So again, you can see that the question that was asked in 2019 was also related to the import of coal and the government's policy regarding the coal sector. And if you knew that India is not self-sufficient in the coal production, you could have eliminated the third statement, and by this you can easily eliminate the options B, C and D. And hence the correct answer that comes out is 1 only. So the previous year questions highlight that the coal sector is one of the important sector for preliminary examination and on which various questions have been asked. So this question reads, consider the following statements related to the coal sector in India. And the first is that the government allows 100% FDI under the automatic route for coal mining in India. And second is that the captive coal mine operators are allowed to sell only 25% of the extracted coal in the open market. Now, in the month of August, the government of India decided to provide 100% FDI or foreign direct investment under the automatic route in the coal and lignite mining. And hence the first statement that is given here is correct. However, the second statement that the captive coal mine operators are allowed to sell only 25% of the extracted coal in the open market is an incorrect statement. And this is because this limit on the captive coal mining was removed recently by the government of India. And earlier the captive coal mine operators were allowed to sell only 25% of the extracted coal in the open market. And now the government has allowed these captive coal mine operators to sell their entire coal in the open market. And thus the government has put an end to the captive coal mining regime itself in India. And hence the correct answer here is A, that is 1 only. So this is an important decision of the government of India that they have ended the captive coal mining regime in India. And regarding captive coal mining, you should note that these mines were allocated to various industries who could extract coal from these coal mines and generate electricity for their own use. And they were not earlier allowed to sell the coal that they extract in the open market. And by various policy changes, the government has now ended this captive coal mining regime itself. So these two decisions, that the 100% FDI is now allowed under automatic route for coal mining and there has been an end to the captive coal mining regime in India, are important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, this news article on page number 10 reads that India attends the Financial Action Task Force group meet online. Now, you might be knowing that the issue of grey listing and blacklisting of Pakistan by the Financial Action Task Force has been in news continuously in the past year. And accordingly, you should be aware of the key aspects related to the Financial Action Task Force, which can be very important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, in a previous prelims practice video, we have discussed a question related to the Financial Action Task Force. And in that, we have discussed the various aspects of the Financial Action Task Force and also the way in which UPSC has asked questions in the preliminary examination related to similar themes. So let us revise from that video. Now, the purpose of embedding some of the videos from the prelims practice in the DNS is that this will help you in understanding the importance of prelims practice for the preliminary examination, because in that an analysis is done of the previous year questions and at the same time important themes in the current affairs are also identified, and based on that questions are prepared. So it is suggested that you go through the playlist of the prelims practice videos that is present on the Rao's IAS channel, and these videos are also present on the eLearn platform. So do go through them and try and understand the importance of prelims practice videos for the upcoming preliminary examination. Now, this 8th question is related to the Financial Action Task Force. And it was in news in the month of August because Pakistan was already placed in the Financial Action Task Force grey list in the year 2018. And in this line, the Asia Pacific group of the FATF had put Pakistan in the enhanced expedited follow-up list for failing to comply with the commitments against terror financing and money laundering. Further, India was pushing with United States of America, France and other countries for putting Pakistan into blacklist now. So in this context, knowing about the Financial Action Task Force and its mandate becomes extremely important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And if you go through this question, which is related to Nuclear Suppliers Group, it was asked in the preliminary examination of 2018. So this question reads, what is the consequence or consequences of a country being a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group? So in this line, you should note that India had got a waiver from the Nuclear Suppliers Group because of support of United States of America. Now, for becoming a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, a country has to first sign the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty, that is the NPT. So in this context, the second statement here becomes incorrect because it does not automatically become a member of the NPT. However, the country has to first sign the NPT to become a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And in this line, you should note that India has not signed this NPT, and as such, it is not becoming a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Further, if you look at the first statement that it will have access to the latest and most efficient nuclear technologies, you should note that the Nuclear Supplier Group aims at controlling the export of nuclear weapon related technologies. So once a country becomes a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, it will have the access to latest and most efficient nuclear technologies. However, this will not include technologies which are related to nuclear weapon making. And hence the correct answer that was related to this question was A, that is 1 only. Now this eighth question that we have created reads that the Financial Action Task Force deals with combating money laundering and combating terror financing only. Second is that Pakistan is a member of Financial Action Task Force. And third is that Iran and North Korea are only two countries in the FATF's list for call for action. Now, if you read about the Financial Action Task Force, you will find that it was established in the year 1989 by the G7 countries. And it was initially created to examine and develop measures to combat money laundering only. However, its mandate was expanded in the year 2001 after the attack on World Trade Center in United States of America. And in this expanded mandate, it had to incorporate efforts to combat terror financing in addition to money laundering. And further, in the year 2012, another thing that was added into its mandate was efforts to counter the financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So presently, its mandate is that it aims at controlling money laundering. Also, it aims at combating terror financing. And again, it aims at countering the efforts of financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So in this line, the first statement here becomes incorrect. And by this, you can easily eliminate the options C and D here. Now, presently, the Financial Action Task Force has 41 members. And in this line, Pakistan is not a member of the Financial Action Task Force. Now, as the mandate of Financial Action Task Force is to combat money laundering, combating terror financing, and also combating the financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So in this line, the FATF monitors not only the member countries, but it also monitors other countries which are not the members of Financial Action Task Force. And in this line, the FATF puts these countries into certain categories which are not complying with the measures of combating terror financing, etc. So the two categories that have been defined by the Financial Action Task Force are the calling for action list, and the second one are the other monitored jurisdictions. And this calling for action list is popularly or informally known as the blacklist of the FATF, while the other monitored jurisdictions list is informally known as the grey list. And presently, Pakistan has been put into the grey list. So in this regard, the current status is that Iran and North Korea are the only two countries in the FATF's list for calling for action, or which is informally known as the blacklist. And hence the correct answer here is third statement. So the option that is correct is A, that is 3 only. Further, it should be noted that India is a member of this Financial Action Task Force. Further, to read about the Financial Action Task Force and the grey listing of Pakistan, you can go through the Focus magazine of September month. And after this, let's take up the next question now. Now, this article on page number 11 is related to a recent approval that has been given by the Finance Ministry to a proposal to allow the individuals and institutions to contribute directly into the National Disaster Relief Fund. Now, we note that in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Prime Minister of India had formed a fund which is known as the PM CARES Fund. Now, the issue with the PM CARES Fund and the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was that both are not considered as public authorities under the Right to Information Act. And accordingly, the information that has been sought under the RTI Act has been refused by the Prime Minister's office. So, in that case, there has been a growing demand that the individual contributions to the PM CARES and the PM NRF should be transferred to the National Disaster Relief Fund, which is a statutory fund which has been created under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. And this National Disaster Relief Fund has been created under the Section 45 of the Disaster Management Act. Now, this Section 46 includes a clause for grants which are made by any person or institution. However, this provision of the Section 46 was not made functional, and provisions for such donations had not been made. So, in this line, the Finance Ministry has given its approval to allow the individuals and institutions to contribute directly to the National Disaster Relief Fund. Now, as the PM CARES Fund was announced in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, this fund came under controversy because of lack of transparency and accountability regarding the amount that was deposited in this fund. And recently, the Prime Minister's office had refused information under the RTI Act by saying that the PM CARES Fund is not a public authority. So, this is an ongoing issue and has been covered previously in the Daily News Simplified. So, accordingly, what we will do is that we will revise from that DNS video various issues related to the PM CARES Fund that we have discussed previously. And they can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And also, this information that individuals and institutions can now contribute to the NDRF is also important for us from the preliminary examination point of view, and especially this aspect that it is a statutory fund which has been created under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Again, this article on page number 7 is related to the PM CARES Fund, and it reads that the PM CARES Fund is not within the ambit of Right to Information Act, and it has been declared by the Prime Minister's office. So now first let us look at who contributes to this PM CARES Fund. So the initial guideline states that the fund receives voluntary contributions from individuals and organizations, and it does not get any budgetary support. That means that it is not funded by the budget of the central government. Secondly, the donations that are made to this PM CARES Fund are exempted and can be counted against a company's corporate social responsibility obligations. So the contributions to this fund are tax exempted, and these contributions can be counted against a company's corporate social responsibility obligations. Again, it is also exempt from the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act 2010. And this fund accepts the foreign contributions also. Now, previously during the Kerala floods, the central government had refused foreign aid to deal with the Kerala flood disaster. So this is a new exception that has been made in the PM CARES Fund. Now, regarding the membership of this PM CARES Fund, you should note that it is headed or chaired by the Prime Minister of India. And the PM can nominate 3 eminent persons in relevant fields to board of trustees of this fund. Again, the Ministers of Defence, Home Affairs and Finance are the ex officio trustees of the PM CARES Fund. Now, as compared to this PM CARES Fund, the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was first set up in 1948. And this was originally set up to accept public contributions for the assistance of partition refugees. Now, regarding its present role, you should note that it is now used to provide immediate relief to the families of those people who are killed in natural calamities. And also, it provides relief to the victims of major accidents, riots, and also provides medical expenses for acid attack victims and others. Now, this Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was initially managed by a committee which included the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and also the Congress President and a representative of the Tata Trustees and an industry representative. However, this composition was changed in the year 1985. And in 1985, the entire management of this fund was handed over to the Prime Minister only, and who has the sole discretion for fund dispersal from this PM National Relief Fund. Now, presently, a joint secretary in the PMO administers the fund on an honorary basis. So what we see is that there is familiarity in the role which is played by both these funds, that is the PM CARES Fund and the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund. Again, both these funds are at the disposal of the Prime Minister of India. And both these funds are aimed at tackling the issues related to natural disasters. However, this PM CARES has been specifically created to tackle the issue of COVID-19 pandemic. So after this, let us look at some of the concerns which have been raised regarding the PM CARES fund. Now, first is that concerns have been raised against companies who are donating to this fund. Now, in this line, you might be knowing that Reliance Industries has made major contributions to the PM CARES fund. However, this company has been accused of cutting the salaries of its own employees. Again, the railways have donated rupees 151 crores to this fund. However, they have not been able to provide free transport for destitute migrant workers. So these are some of the concerns that have been raised regarding the funding of PM CARES fund. Again, the center has not responded to the queries on how much money is there in the PM CARES fund and how and when it will be used for providing the relief to the affected parties due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Further, it is not clear whether this fund comes under the Right to Information Act or is it under the oversight of Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So this is again another serious concern regarding the functioning of the PM CARES fund. Further, the PM CARES web page is opaque regarding the amount of money collected, names of donors, and the expenditure from the fund so far. And in contrast to this, the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund provides the annual donation and expenditure information. However, even this fund does not provide a detailed breakup of the contributors, etc. Further, the PM CARES fund's trust deed is not available for public scrutiny. Further, the decision to allow uncapped corporate donations to the fund, which can be acted or counted as the CSR expenditure, have been opposed by various activists. And such a facility of considering the contributions to this fund as CSR expenditure is not available for funding to the PMNRF or the CM's Relief Fund. And this goes against a previous guideline which states that the CSR should not be used for funding the government schemes. So this move of considering the funding to the PM CARES fund as CSR donations goes against the Government of India's own guidelines only. So some of the issues regarding the functioning of the PM CARES fund is that it is opaque and non-transparent. Again, there are issues related to the accountability of this PM CARES fund. Now, in this background, the Government of India has said that they will provide the details of the members who are funding to this PM CARES fund and also the expenditure from this fund in due course of time. So these are few important issues related to the PM CARES fund, and these can be important for us from the exam point of view. With this, let's take up the next news article now. So with this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.